trying to escape from anything. I loved my family. I had a good childhood. I was born in Helena, Montana, 4 years old. My father packed our whole family up. We moved to the island of Borneo in Southeast Asia. I was raised in Asia. It was a magical childhood. It really, really was. It was beautiful. Came back to the United States a little bit before I was 10 years old. And just out of curiosity, I took a drink. Just my best friend Dave said, hey, my dad's having this party. Let's rip off some booze from downstairs, from his bar downstairs. Let's try it. I go, okay. And boom, my life changed. Alcohol had such a profound effect on me in my life that everything that I cared about as how much does an adolescent care about? But, I enjoyed school. I played sports. I was playing violin. I loved my family. Boom, all of it changed. My family became the enemy. I could care less about school. Sports are out the window. My only obsession was, how do I get more of that? By the time I'm 14 there in Seattle, my hair grew down onto my shoulders and in front of my bloodshot eyes, and my vocabulary at 14 was, whoa, wow, hey, man. I'd call my mother man, hey, man, right? My parents, really good people, and they had no idea what was going on with me. They were just like, what has happened to our son? And they tried to do anything, the parents that didn't understand alcoholism, they tried to do anything that they would do in the 70s. They started to restrict me from hanging out with those kids. You can't hang out with those kids anymore. We got to get them out of the public school system, send them to private schools. They did all of the above. But you see, I'm an alcoholic. My problems are not based upon people, place, and things. My problems are based upon my physical and mental relationship to alcohol. That's where my problems lie. So if you change the people, place, and things in somebody's life like mine, all that happens is that I'm loaded with different people in different places, ruining different things. I think the sun moved. It's right there. Yeah. But man, it's the thought that counts. It really is the thought that counts. Anyway, by the time I'm 18 there in Seattle, my parents decided that Seattle was the problem. Get them out of Seattle, things would get better. So they sent me 300 miles away to Washington State University. I spent 3 years at that university on my parents' money. And in that 3 years, I got approximately 10 credits. At any given time, my grade point average matched my blood alcohol content, about a 0.25. I did nothing at that school. By the time I was 22, this little story I'm about to tell you will let you know exactly where I stood with my family. Now, my father was Swedish. My mother was Icelandic. That's why I kind of look like a polar bear. And I don't know whether this custom I'm about to tell you about is Scandinavian or whether it's Lutheran. But at Christmas time, my parents wouldn't just send out Christmas cards to their friends and relatives. My parents would send out this big, long Christmas letter that said everything the family had been doing that year. And when I was about 22, I got a hold of one of these letters that had been sent out the previous Christmas. And as I read it, it let me know exactly where I stood with my family. Now, the first paragraph talked about what my parents had been doing that year. Another impressive year, I'm sure. My parents were impressive people. They had impressive lives. There's a whole department named after my mother at the University of Washington. There's buildings around the world that are still standing as a result of work my father's done. So I'm sure that paragraph was quite impressive. The next paragraph talked about what the Morris children had been doing that year, and that paragraph went something like this. Our oldest daughter, Christina, just graduated from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, with a master's degree in human resources. She's now working for a large pharmaceutical company in the Midwest. She traveled to Europe this summer. She saw this, she saw that. Her hobbies are this, and this. She's a very happy young woman. We are very proud of her. Our oldest son, Eric, just graduated from Western Washington State University with a degree in marketing. He's now working for a large advertising firm here in downtown Seattle. He loves the golf. He loves to travel. He's engaged to be married to this wonderful woman named Mary Lou, who works for a very small company here in Seattle named Microsoft. It was small at one time. And they love to golf together. They love to travel together. He's a very happy young man. We are very proud of him. Our youngest son, Karl, just turned 22. I was like, long story short, it literally would take till breakfast to describe everything that happened over the next 18 months, so I'm going to condense it down into one sentence. A really bad night happened, so I joined the United States Navy. It was a bad night. What I'm about to tell you should concern you if you care anything about the security of the United States, but on my way into the Navy, I passed a potential test. It's called the ASVAB test, and this test that I took qualified me to become a nuclear engineer. That should concern you that the United States Navy would have any type of system in place, even maybe possibly, or even remotely allow somebody like me near anything nuclear. However, they made me take another test when I showed up at that base for boot camp, and I could not pass that particular test. That test is called a urinalysis test, is what it's called. I never knew how to study for those things. I should have been kicked out of the Navy. A series of events allowed me to stay in. They took away that 2-year nuclear school. They sent me directly out to the fleet. I'm now out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a Spruance-class destroyer. Our squadron's mission was to hunt Russian submarines along the 200-mile radius of the treaty that we had, that no nuclear submarines could come within that radius, and I was on a destroyer squadron where we were to guard that 200-mile radius. And I got to tell you, while the ship was out at sea, I would do very well. I started to understand what it means to serve your country, the honor of that. I started to understand the camaraderie of being in the military. I started to learn, I got a trade that could probably help me later in life. However, I'm alcoholic. Doesn't matter what a young man might be learning if he doesn't address his alcoholism, because no matter what was going to be happening, it was going to bite me in the rear end. And although I would do well while the ship was out at sea, that ship would pull into a port. And I would leave that ship and I'd take a drink. At this point in my life, I'm 23, I'm 24, I'm 25 years old, and I would leave that ship and I'd take a drink. And at this point in my life, when I take a drink, I would be triggering off a minimum of a 2-day drunk, sometimes a 3-day drunk. Every once in a while, it would last 4 days. And I got to tell you, when you're on a 4-day drunk and your ship is only in port for 2 days, this is a problem. The Navy frowns at this behavior. More than once, I would come to and find myself at 6 a.m. on a large pier in a foreign country, and I'd be looking up and down that pier going, there was a destroyer here the other day. I've been in the Navy approximately 2 years at this point, and I came to in a cheap motel room in downtown San Diego. Once again, when I came to, I realized it's a Monday, and I'd started drinking last Thursday, and the nightmare one more time. And I scrambled to grab my belongings, and I get to my car, and I'm trying to race back to the ship. I know I'm late one more time, and you know the old saying, my car is dying of alcoholism right along with me. And it's held together by rubber bands and duct tape, and I'm trying to get back to the base. And one of the tools for living I got at this point is I would always save a pint for the end of that drunk, because I know once I get back to my ship, it's going to be a while till I get a drink. So I'm driving the car into the base, and I'm trying to get that pint in me. And at the front of every Navy base, there's a guard shack where a Marine stands duty. And this is pre-9/11. Security is high, but nothing like it is now. But under normal circumstances, you're supposed to slowly and politely bring your vehicle up to that guard shack. That Marine will check your military ID. He will check the sticker on your front windshield. If everything's in order, he'll allow you to proceed onto that base. This particular morning, as I said, I'm in a hurry, and I'm trying to get that pint in me, and all of a sudden my eyes came into focus, and I saw the Marine had his head out of the guard shack like, and I'm wondering, what is he so excited about? Until I look down, I'm still going 40 miles an hour, and I tried to swerve. The car hit this cement median on the right-hand side, and it flipped over and bang, right through that guard shack. And I can still see that Marine doing this big dive out of that thing. And as I stand before you, I am so very grateful. The United States Marines are in tip-top physical shape. This guy did a big dive. He did a somersault. He's back up, weapon drawn. And I really hated these types of mornings. I really did. Sirens going off and people screaming and yelling, and everybody's pointing at me like this is my fault. And I was climbing out of the car. I had a few questions as to what happened also. I just like what on earth happened here? Hated those mornings. Stage 2 of mornings that I hated. About an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I find myself and I'm in a hospital bed, and I'm handcuffed to the hospital bed. I really hated those types of mornings. That morning, my Navy superiors are, of course, reading new charges on me, and this is nothing significant. This is just what happens in a guy's life like mine about every 90 days if you're living the way I'm living. But the most significant thing that happened that morning is the Navy doctors prescribed this stuff called antabuse for me. I love the nervous laughter in AA when you say antabuse. Oh. I was now under orders to show up at sick bay every single morning before quarters, and I'd have to sit in a chair, much like we're sitting in tonight, and I'd have to stick my tongue out. And the hospital coroner would come with this little white pill, and he'd put it on my tongue and make me sit there for a half an hour to make sure that antabuse actually got into my system. And over the next 7 to 10 days, I started to experience the most cunning, baffling, and powerful side of this thing we call alcoholism. And that is that I had no alcohol in my system, and I'm slowly going insane. See, throughout my life, various points in my life, alcohol would be taken away from me by people who loved me, cared about me, or who had authority over me. And each time that would happen, I would always be put in front of well-meaning, highly educated people, some sort of psychiatrist, therapist, counselor, somebody, pastors. And each of these people, we would have these one-on-one appointments, and they'd look at me and they'd say, "What's the matter with you?" They'd all have their own version of, "What's the matter with you?" And if I would have had the vocabulary that, oh goodness sakes, this is going down below there now. If I would have had the vocabulary that you have given me in Alcoholics Anonymous over the last 37 years, I would have responded to these well-meaning people that obviously cared and wanted to help. I would have said, "I see that you're shocked by my drinking. I am too sometimes. I get it." But I would have followed that up with, "But if you knew how I felt when I wasn't drinking, you wouldn't be asking me why I drink. There's only one thing worse than the price I'm paying for my drinking, and that's the way that I feel when I'm not drinking." And I don't know how to verbalize that feeling, but I got to tell you, in that moment and that feeling that I had, I was defining my own alcoholism in that feeling. I lasted about 10 days on that antabuse. I went AWOL from my ship. I locked myself in a little motel room in downtown San Diego. Plaza Hotel, it's on 4th and Broadway. It is still standing. I checked about a year and a half. Back in May of 1986, it cost $13 a night to be at this fine establishment. I checked about a year and a half ago. They had raised it to about $19 a night now. With recent inflation, it might be 21 now. I'm not really sure. Check the Yelp reviews. I locked myself in this little motel room, and I had a bottle of vodka and a shot glass sitting on a little rickety end table. And as I sat there staring at the bottle of vodka, I remembered that the Navy doctors had given me a very stern warning about drinking on top of the antabuse. They had said, "Son, you need to understand that if you drink on top of this antabuse, you will get one of two reactions. One reaction is you will get violently ill, and the other reaction, son, and you need to hear us, the other reaction you might have, you might die. You might have complete organ failure if you drink on top of this antabuse." I remember sitting on the edge of the bed looking at that bottle, and I thinking about what the Navy doctor had told me, and I thought to myself, well, wonder which reaction I'm going to get. And I took one shot, and nothing happened. Authority had lied to me again as far as I was concerned. I waited about 2 minutes just to make sure. And I took another shot. All of a sudden, I felt tingly in the face, so I looked in this cracked little mirror that was in this hotel room, and I was bright red, blotchy and purple in places. Took another shot. All of a sudden, I could feel my heart going boom, boom, boom. Looked at my shirt. I was drenched in sweat, and all of a sudden, like hyperventilating. We're doing all right so far. I took another shot, and up it came. My second sponsor was a man named Eddie Cochran. His sobriety date was December 2nd, 1951. I used to drive him up here to meetings all the time. He would always speak up here. A man named Mike Marina used to live down in Camarillo, and we would always meet him for Mexican food. And I loved Eddie. I loved Mike. They were some of my biggest mentors in Alcoholics Anonymous when I got up into this area. I'm sure a number of you remember them both. Eddie called the next thing that happened to me projectile regurgitation. This is a new level of puking I am unfamiliar with. Because we all know normal puking, right? We all know it's one of the tools for living we get out there. Out there in the middle of a good drunk, you get that little warning, right? A little sour taste in the back of the throat. Maybe a little bit comes up in the mouth. You got to go, and you just go, "Heart!" And then you're just right back into the conversation. It's not the end of the night, right? But here on the antabuse, this was something new. It's like, "Heart!" Sort of like this Linda Blair spray across the room. Thank God the Plaza Hotel is the type of hotel room where the toilet is in the same room with the bed. It's a design feature, I believe, maybe to make convicts feel more at home upon release. I'm not really sure. But I found the magic of drinking on top of antabuse, and that is if you hang in there. And that's a very important feature. If you're going to drink on antabuse, you cannot half measure it. In fact, if you're going to drink on top of antabuse, you might need to reach down deep inside yourself for a level of commitment you might not even know you have. But I found that if I kept drinking and kept puking and kept drinking and kept puking for about an hour to an hour and a half, enough of the antabuse would kick out of my system, and I would quit throwing up, and I would just be left with red face, hyperventilating, and sweating, and I'm all right with that. So I drank on top of antabuse the last 7 months of my drinking. The only words to describe this are desperation drinking. My second to my last drunk, I was left for dead in a motel parking lot in an area of San Diego called National City. Last thing I remember, a lot of fists were flying. They apparently were not mine. Then there was a lot of blood. That apparently was mine. And then the next thing I knew, I came to and I'm on an operating table. And you know how when we describe we come to and we're looking, we really look around to see was it a good night or a bad night. And when you come to and you find yourself on an operating table, that's usually an indicator of a rather rough night. My last night of drinking, I'm being let out of the San Diego jail. I'm being transferred from the civilian authorities back to the military authorities. The handcuffs are extra tight. I'm being led around by the arm, and when my neck muscles are not working well. And later that morning, they tried to bring me back to my ship, and that morning the officer deck put his arm up and said, we're not allowed to allow him to cross the quarterdeck of this vessel. The orders have already been processed on this loser. The orders are 90 days in the brig, bad conduct discharge. Then he got this sort of sour look on his face. He goes, apparently these orders say he can go to treatment. And I remember when they said treatment, I went, Now, it wasn't because I thought treatment was a good idea. I didn't even really know what it was. I mean, I'd heard of that before, but this is how I would have heard of treatment. I'd be in a bar or a crack house, and somebody say, where's Joe? And somebody go, oh, Joe got arrested, man. He went to treatment. And we'd all go, ugh. That was it. There was no follow-up questions. There was no discussions on maybe check in on Joe. None of that. It was just, ugh, right? The reason that this treatment option interested me is it sounded like that treatment thing might help me with the inevitable charges that were once again coming my way. I was 25 years old. Obviously, by listening to my story, I'm not that bright, right? But I did know that whenever I was in handcuffs, court dates always followed. It just always seemed to be that way. Handcuffs, within the next 30 to 60 days, I'm in front of a judge. So I thought this treatment thing might help me with the inevitable court cases that were coming. But I now know it wouldn't have mattered what I was thinking or feeling that morning because I was in handcuffs. And I don't know about your experience in handcuffs, but my experience was always the same. Whoever had me in handcuffs, never once did they ever turn to me and say, so what's your opinion on what happens next? Right? When you're in handcuffs, you go where they say, and I was taken up to this military treatment center in the north end of San Diego, and when the doors were locked behind me, that's when they took the handcuffs off me. And I got to tell you, there's no better representation of who Karl Morris is without Alcoholics Anonymous than that. The country I'm supposed to be serving and the society I'm supposed to be living in and contributing to is only willing to take the handcuffs off me when the doors are locked behind me, and rightfully so. So I got to do this 45 days in this military treatment center. I got to tell you, as far as I'm concerned, the late 1980s, early 1990s, as far as I'm concerned, the United States Navy had a first-class treatment center. It's not because they had some wonderful new detox or it's because they had some wonderful counseling. I'm sure all of that was wonderful. The reason I think it's so amazing is because 4 to 5 nights a week, white vans would pull up to those barracks, and 6 or 7 of us would be put into each one of these white vans, and the vans would be taken out into town, and we would show up at your meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am so very grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous allows outside agencies to refer potential alcoholics to come watch Alcoholics Anonymous. As I sat in the back rows with the other military men and women, I did not know that there was a difference between watching Alcoholics Anonymous and actually doing Alcoholics Anonymous. But I got to tell you, by allowing me to sit back there and watch Alcoholics Anonymous, it saved my life. It literally saved my life. I didn't have any sort of massive spiritual awakening as I sat in the back of those rooms, but this did happen. I had what I like to call a lean forward moment in my life where it's like, what did they just say? Oh my God, they know. They know. Now, if you would have been sitting next to me and looked at me like, okay, kid, what is it that they know that you think you know? I would have gone, I don't know. But they know. And what it was is I was identifying. There was something in the way that you guys told your stories about your life and your relationship to alcohol, and maybe even more importantly, your relationship to the world when alcohol was taken away from you, in the way that you told your stories, that I was like, yeah, that's exactly what's been happening to me. Another thing that literally got me, there was nothing funny about what was going on in my life. Nothing at all. I mean, I had a lot of charges going on with me. My family wouldn't talk to me. I'm about ready to be kicked out of the Navy, and they're literally, the only thing that was keeping me from being a street person was this little piece of paper that you are temporarily still in the Navy, kid. Right? That's the only thing that separated me from, there was nothing funny. But I would be sitting in these meetings and you would tell a story and I would involuntarily go, and, right? And sometimes it was just these old timers. I remember they would be telling the same story all the time. I didn't understand. Well, here, a few months later, I'm with my first sponsor, another guy from my ship, and his sponsor who had like 30 years. And we're all sitting in a meeting, right? And an old timer got up to tell the same story. And I say to my first sponsor, who only had like 14 more months to me, so he didn't know what he was doing. And I go, hey, is he telling the same story we heard last week? And he goes, yeah, I guess they do that. But the grand sponsor reached past my sponsor and hit me in the back of the head, like, bang! I'm like, Jesus. He goes, he's not talking to you tonight. He's talking to the brand new person that apparently you're unaware is in the room. And I literally had a spiritual awakening of, oh, there's other people in AA. It's not just for me. Oh my God. Oh my God. And another experience of where you guys got me to laugh about the seemingly devastating thing of alcoholism. I was a number of months sober, and I'm going to quote this friend of mine, Scott Redmond, that passed away many years ago. He used to always say, I'm really not a suicide guy. I'm much more of a homicide guy. Your death always looks better than mine. And that's really true with me. But this one night, I was really having a tough time. I was on my ship, and we were in port for a while, and I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. And I decided to leave the ship and go off to a candlelight meeting down in Chula Vista somewhere. And I went to this candlelight meeting, and an old timer in there said, if anybody out there is thinking possibly that you might want to commit suicide, I want you to know that I have it on good authority that however you're feeling when you commit suicide is how you will feel for all of eternity. And I went, oh man, that's really bad news. But this old timer was a responsible member of AA and never would throw a problem out on the floor without already having the solution. So he said, so the solution is wait till you're having a really good day, then do it. And literally, he took me, he didn't even know me. He probably didn't even know I was in the room. But he took me from the darkest place a human being can possibly go, where they're thinking of ending it. There's no darker spiritual place to be than that. And I was there. And he took me from the darkest place a human being can be. Within 1 second, I was uncontrollably laughing. And I got to tell you, these little stories that people tell in Alcoholics Anonymous that sometimes I know, I do it too. Oh, God, he's saying the same thing again. Oh, really? Right? It was such a valuable lesson. Not talking to me. They're talking to the person I'm not even aware is in the room. 45 days I get out of that military treatment center. My orders, now don't ask me what Navy clerk did this, but they let me out on a Friday afternoon, and my orders said, I don't need to be back to my ship till Monday. And it send them to expensive treatment at taxpayer dollars, and then give them the weekend off. Right? But I remember my car was delivered to me out of this impound lot because I'd been arrested in the vehicle the night before. And I was leaving that base up at Miramar. The treatment center was at Miramar Naval Air Station, where Top Gun pilot school was. Our little section was called Top Drunk, is what they called us. And I remember leaving that base in this little 68 Volkswagen that had a push start, and I'm puttering off that base. And if you know about where Miramar is, there's the 15 freeway right where the 163 comes. And I literally, when they say we stood at the turning point, I got to tell you that I've stood at the turning point many times in my 37 years here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I mean by that is when you look back at certain situations, you see if I turned left, my life would have gone that way. If I would have turned right, my life would have gone that way. And I got to tell you, there have been at least 10 major turning points in my life. My very first one sober was pulling off that base. And I remember thinking, if I turn right, I can go on the 15 to the 163 and drop right back downtown San Diego and go right to the Plaza Hotel. I can pick up right where I left. Or if I turn left, I remember they took us to this meeting hall in Pacific Beach. I remembered where that was because there was a bar that I used to drink at near it. And I remember in the van, I looked, oh, there's that bar. And in a few blocks, boom, we were at the meeting. And I remembered where it was. And that was I guarantee if I would have turned right, you'd have a different speaker tonight. I turned left, and I showed up at the 6 o'clock gong show meeting in Pacific Beach. Big, bustling, fun meeting. I'm sitting in the back. I don't know anybody. But one guy that night, operating in his primary purpose, came barreling across the meeting before it started, said, hey, I've never seen you here before. What you doing? Like all aggressive and stuff, and he startled me, and I accidentally told him the truth. I go, I don't know, I just got out of a Navy treatment center about an hour ago. I don't know what I'm doing. This guy's eyes went bing, big smile went across his face. He looked like he had just hit the jackpot in Las Vegas. I didn't understand that I just established myself as the holy grail of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a new guy who accidentally admitted he did not know what he was doing, right? So at the break, this guy's fighting his friends. Oh, this guy's mine, I got him. This is mine. Now, I didn't know there was something else going on in this guy's life that particular Friday night that made him especially glad to meet me. This guy's girlfriend had left him the night before for one of his friends in his home group. I know. So he was wondering what he was going to do with his weekend: homicide, suicide, get loaded, or grab this newcomer. He's like all over me all weekend. We went to like 18 meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this guy was insane over this woman. In between this barrage of meetings he dragged me to, he'd throw me to the passenger side of his car. He'd start driving, and he'd start yelling. He wouldn't even look at the road. He had like one of those AA radar cards that just made it to the next meeting, I guess. And he'd be yelling at me, you got to go to meetings, you got to read the book, you got to get sponsored. Damn her! Got to go to meetings, got to read the book. Jesus. I didn't know it, but I was getting a very early introduction to your typical AA relationship breakup is what I was getting. But I'm so very glad that that guy, that night in his pain, was a guy in Alcoholics Anonymous who had done the work of Alcoholics Anonymous, had taken the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and therefore he understood that the solution to his pain was out of self, out of self, out of self. I got back to my ship, and the one other sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous was waiting for me. I already made reference to him. His name was Bob W. He was 23 years old. He had 14 months of sobriety. He was very proud about his name. He'd say, my name's Bob W. I'm the hybrid of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. If there was such a thing as a rolling eye emoji, we would have all done it. Oh, God. I spent my first 2 years of sobriety still on that same ship, the USS Cushing, and we traveled the world. And whenever that ship would pull into a port, Bob and I would go find you guys. It didn't matter where we were in the world. We made it, I'm going to sound like your grandfather when you asked for a ride for the school. There was no meeting apps. There was no social media. Hey, got a buddy showing up, right? No. Wherever that ship would pull into port, we would hunt you guys out. We'd have to use a real map and a real payphone and call and get an address, follow the map, and you guys were always there. You guys were always there. Whether there was 2 of you or 200 of you, didn't matter where we were. We could find you guys. Then when the ship was out at sea, and we'd be out at sea for weeks at a time, my first sponsor told us that we needed to read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous back and forth to each other every single night. If he didn't give us that direction, we would have tried to meet and say, what do you got to say, Bob? I don't know, right? Instead, we started reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He would read, I would read, he would read, I would read. Bob had 14 months. He shared what little he knew, right? And I got to tell you, when I view in my mind's eye those 2 young men in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on that destroyer, 2 young men trying to stay sober, Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I literally view it as Alcoholics Anonymous in its purest form. The blind leading the blind. Neither one of us knew what we were doing, but you know what? We had a willingness to stay sober. We had a Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We had the fellowship whenever the ship would pull into port. We had what we needed. And we both had what was supposed to happen, happened for both of us. We both had a fundamental rearrangement of our attitudes and ideas towards life. His sobriety stayed intact 16 months ahead of me when he passed away of cancer in 2011. One of the most wonderful things, being at his funeral, 5 young men walk up to me at his funeral, and they got this beat-up big book, and they go, Bob made us promise that at the funeral we would give this to you. And I go, what is it? And they go, Bob said if you open it up, you'll know. And I open it up, and his sobriety date, my sobriety, it's the book from the ship, right? I got a first edition in my office, but in a fire I would grab that one first. I know you guys, it's all fun. You guys got to take cakes here, and your whole group sang to you, and you guys are probably going out to ice cream after to celebrate your birthday. Your family's real proud. My first year birthday was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Bob went and stole a stale piece of cornbread off the mess deck. There were no candles. He lit a match, popped it in there, and he sang himself, Happy Birthday. It was as corny as could be, but I got to tell you, that night laying in my rack, I literally had this overwhelming feeling of, oh my God, it really has been a full year. It's one thing I was sure about in my life is I had not had a drink in a whole year. There were a lot of other things in my life. I still had court cases going on. I still didn't know where I truly stood with the Navy. I was trying my best to clean stuff up. That would take a whole another afternoon of a workshop on steps 8 and 9. But I knew one thing, I had not taken a drink in a year. And I knew I had hope. I knew I had hope. 2 years sober, got an honorable discharge out of the Navy. That's a result of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, an apparently merciful God, and a Navy clerk that lost half my file. That's how that happened. And I don't have much time to cover it, but maybe I'll come talk another time. But I've kind of run out of time, and I know that it's hot and stuff like that, and it's okay, it's okay. The thing that's happened, I moved up to Covina simply to get a degree because the grand sponsor, my first sponsor, Bob, didn't know how to make that amend to my parents. They'd spent all that money at Washington State University, University of Washington, and Seattle U. I didn't bring all those up. I didn't have a degree. My parents had spent all that money. Bob didn't, I don't know what you're supposed to do. The grand sponsor got involved, and it's never good news when the grand sponsor gets involved in these decisions. And he said, you need to either pay your parents back every single nickel they wasted, or you got to go get what they paid for. And that's how I wound up in Covina in 1989 when I got out of the Navy at 2 years of sobriety. And I did that just to get a degree, and I meant to go back to Seattle and use that tech degree to use family contacts. I was going to go chase the technology world, and it would have been good in the 90s. It really would. Whew. Man. But what happened is I found a home group. I didn't know that's what I'd been a nomad my first 2 years of sobriety. It's just what the circumstances were, but when I found what a home group meant, that's the foundation that has given me, it's allowed me to become a man in my community. It's allowed me to feel like I have a meaning that's a life that's worth something, that has meaning and purpose. I got to be a dad. I'm a dad. Michelle is a mom from different people, but right? It's not abnormal in AA, is it? It's really not. It's kind of the standard, right? But we've been together for 5 years, and we both have really. She loves her kids like, and just the best mom. And the woman that I was married to, she's been a really good mom, and we have really some spectacular kids. I'm really quite surprised that my kids have turned out this well. They're 17 and 19 with my DNA and my ex-wife's attitude. It's really bizarre. They are being that successful at life. I'm teasing. But you know what? All those things that I would have missed had you guys not intervened in my life when I was 25 years old. The sum total of my life would have been when somebody carelessly mentioned my name in front of my mother, she would have turned away and tried not to snap back. You know, why would you bring his name up? Don't you understand the pain and suffering this has caused? Right? Instead, she died when I had 30 years of sobriety. She got to see, my dad died when I had 10 years of sobriety. They got to celebrate, you know, that Alcoholics Anonymous had given their son back to them. And there's not much more that I can do. Be a good son and a good dad. Thank you.
Thank you, Karl. One more time for Karl. Yeah.